Number 15. Ted Bundy. This man is easily one of the most horrific serial killers in history. When he was arrested in Colorado, he waived his right to an attorney because he wanted to represent himself. This turned out to be the first step in his incredibly simple but clever escape plan. Since he was technically the lawyer of the accused, the judge excused him from wearing any restraints so he could move around the courtroom. So during a court recess, Bundy asked to visit the courtroom library to research his case, which the judge said he could. The judge was also okay with the unrestrained serial killer going alone. As soon as he was left unsupervised, he jumped out of a second-story window and escaped to freedom. 6 months later, Bundy was caught again and the trial resumed, but he still wasn't ready to accept his fate. So he began slowly sawing a hole in his cell's ceiling. Then on Christmas Eve, he hid his books under his blanket to make it look like he was sleeping and escaped. Well, it turned out the chief jailer's apartment was right above his cell. You may think this was game over for Bundy, but the jailer was actually out on a date. So Bundy stole his clothes and walked out his front door to freedom. Of course, he was eventually recaptured and executed via the electric chair. Number 14. Choi Gap-bok. This yoga master had been practicing the art for 23 years, and when he was arrested for robbery, it really paid off. While the 3 police officers guarding him were sleeping, he rubbed skin ointment all over his upper body and slipped through his 6-inch high, 18-inch wide food slot. His escape took only 34 seconds. He was caught 6 days later and put into a cell with a much smaller food hole. The question is now if Gap-bok will accept his fate or if he sees it as a bigger challenge. Number 13. Charles Thompson. After murdering his ex-girlfriend, he was sentenced to death in 1998. In 2005, he felt like he had enough of death row and decided it was time to escape. Thompson smuggled in civilian clothing because walking around in an orange jumpsuit near a prison is pretty suspicious. Next, he scheduled a meeting with his lawyer, and when Thompson's lawyer left the room, he switched into his civilian clothes and walked right out his cell because it wasn't locked. Once he reached the prison exit, he was stopped by the guard at the front desk. Thompson pulled out his inmate badge and said he was with the Attorney General's office. The guard looked at the badge that every prisoner had at the prison he was a guard at and said, "I've never seen one of those badges before." So he let Thompson leave without asking any other questions. Thompson had literally walked out the front door of the prison he was a death row prisoner at to freedom. He was eventually recaptured after deciding to visit a liquor store and getting very drunk outside of said liquor store. Number 12. Frank Abagnale. This con man was known for his elaborate schemes. The best one was his prison escape in 1971. He was being transported without detention commitment papers, which Abagnale saw as an opportunity to escape. He worked with his friend Jean Sebring to make the guards believe that he was an undercover prison inspector and use fake identification to back up his claims. The guards had also received a business card for Sean O'Reilly, the FBI agent in charge of Abagnale's case. The number on it was actually Sebring's, and when the police called it, he backed up Abagnale's claims. The guards, thinking they were smart, let Abagnale out and watched as him and Sebring drove off. Number 11. John Dillinger. After being sent to Lake County Jail, which was thought to be escape-proof due to the mixture of National Guard troops and policemen as guards. Although his escape is still open to debate, Dillinger carved a fake gun out of some wood from a shelf in his cell and a razor, and then took a hostage in the jail. He then stole the sheriff's brand new Ford and fled, although this ultimately led to his death because driving a stolen vehicle across state lines led to his run-in with the FBI. Number 10. Roger Buchel. Stalag Luft III was a Nazi prisoner of war camp during World War II that contained captured Air Force personnel. Buchel led what was called the Great Escape. The escape plan was to dig 3 holes in places that would be undetectable by the camp guards. The tunnels were dug to be very deep at 30 feet below the surface to avoid detection by perimeter microphones. As the tunnels grew, so did the amount of their technical innovations. A pump was built to pump fresh oxygen into the tunnels, as well as lighting that was hooked up to the camp's electrical grid. Even a small rail car system for moving sand quicker was installed. Finally, when the last tunnel was completed, the prisoners made their escape. It didn't go exactly to plan because the tunnel was supposed to reach a nearby forest, but it was just short of the tree line. 76 men crawled through undetected, but a guard noticed the 77th emerge from the tunnel. Only 3 were not either recaptured or killed. Number 9. Elfie Hines. This professional jewel thief became a celebrity in Britain just because of his repeated prison escapes. Overall, he managed to break out of 3 high-security prisons. The first time, he simply unlocked the prison door after somehow memorizing the exact shape of the key and making a copy. 8 months later, he was caught again, and this time his plan was a little more elaborate. Hines filed a lawsuit against his arresting officers, claiming it was an illegal arrest, but this was just the first part of his escape plan. In the courthouse, he asked to use the bathroom. Hines had also arranged for an accomplice to leave a padlock in there. So when the guards removed his handcuffs so he could use the bathroom, he grabbed them both and threw them into the stall. He then closed the door and locked it shut. After a few more stints in prison, Hines discovered a loophole in the legal system that left him a free man even though he was obviously guilty. Number 8. Sławomir Rawicz. This man was a Polish soldier who was arrested by Soviet troops after the German-Soviet invasion of Poland. He was sentenced to 25 years of hard labor in a Siberian prison camp for spying. He was then taken to Camp 303 along with thousands of other prisoners, which was only 400 miles south of the Arctic Circle, to build the entire camp. On April 9, 1941, he saw his opportunity to escape when a massive blizzard hit the camp. Rawicz and his 6 allies slipped away and began their walk to freedom. The men crossed through the Gobi Desert, Tibet, and the Himalayas to reach British India in 1942. That's a walk of about 4,000 miles that took 11 months. Out of the 6 men, 4 died, 2 in the Gobi Desert and 2 in the Himalayas. Rawicz would eventually rejoin the Polish army. Number 7. Alfred Wetzler. He was one of the very few Jews to ever escape from Auschwitz during the Holocaust. On the night of Passover, him and another man climbed into a hiding place inside a wood pile that was stored to build a section for new arrivals. Then some other prisoners covered the pile in gasoline-soaked tobacco to fool the guard dogs. The 2 remained hiding for 4 days for the perfect moment to escape, because recapture was guaranteed death. They began making their way south wearing Dutch suits and overcoats they had found inside the prison. They headed towards the Polish-Slovakia border using a page from a child's atlas that was found inside the warehouse. They had also brought with them the first credible report of Auschwitz that led to the Allies bombing several Hungarian government buildings that killed many Nazi officials in charge of deporting Jews to Auschwitz, which ended up saving 120,000 lives. Number 6. Richard Lee McNair. In 1987, he killed a man and left another wounded while trying to rob a grain elevator in North Dakota. He received 2 life sentences for this, but that didn't stop him from staying a free man. McNair escaped from 2 prisons and 1 county jail over the course of a few decades. The first time was from a police station jail. While sitting in a room with 3 detectives, he greased his hands using lip balm and slipped out of his cuffs. Somehow he made it out, but was quickly recaptured by authorities. Then 4 years later, he escaped from a state penitentiary by literally crawling through the air vents. This time he evaded police for a bit longer. 10 months later, he was recaptured and sent to a maximum security prison. While there, he got the job of repairing mail bags. At some point of doing this, he had the amazing idea of getting into one of the bags and mailing himself out of the prison. When the mail bags were taken to a nearby warehouse, he simply got out and left. He was then spotted walking along a railway line by a police officer later that day. The whole conversation between the officer and McNair was recorded, and even though he gives 2 completely different names, has no ID on him, and matches the description of the convict that escaped earlier that day, The officer just gives him some tips about railroad safety, gets back in his car, and drives off. His luck eventually wore out and he's currently back in prison. Number 5. Dieter Dangler. This American Navy pilot had a special ability. He was able to escape from any mock POW camp that he was put in during training. This came in handy when he was shot down and put into a jungle prison camp during the Vietnam War. While the guards were eating, Dangler and 6 others got out of their hand and foot restraints and grabbed the guards' unattended weapons. As soon as the guards had realized that they had escaped, 5 rushed at Dangler, which he killed 3 of them as the other 2 ran off. The escapees then split into 3 groups and fled into the jungle. Dangler was discovered 23 days later by an American helicopter. He was severely dehydrated and was covered in bites from both mosquitoes and leeches. 7 of us escaped, said Dangler. I was the only one who came out alive. He was the only American to ever successfully escape from a prison camp during the Vietnam War. Number 4. Keith Rose, Andrew Roger, and Matthew Williams. These 3 kept their escape plan simple. In the prison's sheet metal shop, which was probably closed down after this incident, they made a 25-foot steel ladder, a gun, and a copy of the prison officer's key. Then at the end of their gym time, they waited for the guards to be busy and simply unlocked the door and walked out. They cut through the inner fence and used their massive ladder to climb the outer fence. The guards must have been really busy to not notice 3 prisoners carrying a 25-foot ladder. They were only free men for 4 days because the police found them hiding in a shed. Number 3. The Texas 7. This group of prisoners had an elaborate plan to escape from the maximum security prison they were in. Many had nothing to lose because they were serving life sentences. The lowest sentence any of them had was 30 years. At 11:20 a.m., the 7 overpowered 9 civil maintenance supervisors, 4 guards, and 3 uninvolved inmates. One of the offenders would call someone over while the other hit them in the head from behind. They would then tie them up and gag them, hiding the unconscious bodies in an electrical room behind a locked door. When the authorities grew suspicious, they impersonated the guards on the phone, which surprisingly worked. 3 of the 7 then raided a guard tower while the other 4 made calls to the prison tower guards to distract them. Then they stole a maintenance pickup truck and drove off. They were eventually captured directly because of the episode of America's Most Wanted that featured them. The 5 that are still alive are waiting to be executed. Number 2. Frank Morris, Clarence and John Anglin. This escape from Alcatraz was so daring that it was later made into a movie starring Clint Eastwood. They placed heads made out of soap, toilet paper, and real hair to fool the nighttime guards and escape through their tunnels. They led to an unused service corridor which they had used to reach the roof by climbing a ventilation shaft. The guards thought the loud noise of the shaft smashing through the roof was nothing serious. When the noise stopped, the guards figured there was no point in investigating. The trio then climbed from the roof, scaled the fence, and made a raft out of raincoats and contact cement. They hopped on and paddled to freedom. Well, the FBI claims they must have drowned. This is probably because they wanted to maintain the reputation of Alcatraz being impossible to escape from, and since no bodies were ever found, this makes this one of the greatest prison escapes ever. Number 1. Vasily Palakostas. He's considered the Robin Hood of Greece after doing a series of bank robberies and kidnappings for ransoms and sharing his earnings with the poor. He was eventually caught though and sent to prison. He wouldn't stay for long because he had his brother land a helicopter in the prison exercise yard to pick him up. This plan actually worked and Palakostas escaped. The guards thought it was a surprise visit from prison inspectors because no one would be crazy enough to escape from prison with a helicopter. Palakostas went right back to bank robberies and kidnapping until he was caught again. Once again, he wouldn't stay long in prison though after he decided to literally use the exact same escape plan. He was once again picked up by a helicopter at the same prison as the first time and has never been captured by authorities again. Got an idea for a top 15 list? Be sure to leave it in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe for future videos. Thanks for watching.